Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Leggett and Lumon How Could the UK Election Impact Your French Plans webinar. My name is Jonathan Watson. I'm a currency specialist here at Lumon, an international payment provider working very closely with all the people you see on screen for your international payments for a French property. Thank you for joining us for this exciting evening to discuss the UK election and how it could affect anything to do with your plans over in France. I'm broadcasting from a very warm London today. It is over in France. We want to take a look at the impact the election could have on your French plans and how you can best manage this. Tonight I'm joined by some real experts in their fields, a very bespoke select panel, and I will shortly hand over to them for their introductions. We want this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so you should see a question box on the side of the panel that you've logged into. And please do raise any questions that you have. We do always struggle to get through all of them, but we will try to answer as many as possible. And we've actually had lots of questions submitted beforehand, so we will be running through some of those. But yes, it's always good to get the live ones in as well. We will share a recording of this event at the end. You will have a chance to speak to all of our panelists in more detail. But yes, thank you for joining us. And I'm now going to hand over to our panel. So Trevor, owner and founder of Leggett Immobilier, over to you, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Trevor Leggett, the owner of Leggett Immobilier. I've been living in France for nearly 35 years. We started the company back in 1997, so we've seen the ups and downs. And I'm happy to help you out if I can. So back to you, John.
Thank you, Trevor. That's brilliant. And over to you, Eric DONJON, Honorary Consul.
Good evening, everyone. Eric DONJON, French national, living in the UK, 40 years in the UK this year. That's probably why I speak all right in English. And I'll be here tonight as a director of the French, an English company, the European Concierge, helping you with your visas, carte de séjour, and any question you might have with making the big move and getting the sticker in your passport.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. And over to you, rob.kay from Blevins, France.
Good evening. As John just said, my name is Rob Kay. I'm the regional director for Blevins, France, mainly for the northern area of our European operations. For those of you not familiar with Blevins, France, we've been providing strategic financial planning advice, which is sort of cross-border advice for British nationals who've moved to France, Spain, Portugal, Cyprus, and Malta. At the moment, we have 65 advisors across all those jurisdictions, and we're looking after about 5,000 families. Here in France, we've got 9 offices stretching from Rennes in the north down to Béziers in the south and across to Annecy in the east. And we'd like to think that we've been the go-to cross-border advisor for nearly 50 years. It's our 50th anniversary next weekend, so I hope this evening we'll be able to shed some light on what's happening in the UK, which could impact people who have arrived and are planning to arrive in France.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And last but by no means least, the fabulous Fab from FAB Insurance.
Hopefully fabulous. Probably the one with the thickest French accent here. I've only been 1 year in the UK, so bear with me. Sorry about that. So I'm Fabien, founder and managing director of FAB Insurance. I've been helping the English-speaking community move to France since 2015. Obviously, insurance is our jam. We mostly help with insurance for visas and residency permits, but all of the sexy, boring stuff, car and property insurance as well. And hopefully that's what we'll keep on doing for years to come. Yeah, back to you, John.
Excellent. Thank you, Fab. Right. Well, thank you everyone for their introductions. Let's dive into some of these questions. So we've had lots submitted beforehand. Trevor, let me come to you first. I mean, I think I know the answers to this one, but I think it's going to be quite helpful for our audience. It's really talking about the buying process in France and whether that's likely to change under a new government. So I think I probably know the answer to that, but maybe if you just run through briefly the French buying process for anyone who maybe doesn't know and what the new government in the UK could mean for that.
I can't really see it making an awful lot of difference to the buying process for non-residents. There'll be probably some changes for residents as we move in the next 6 months. There's already been some propositions made, but they'll only apply to residents non-residents buying in France. As we know, some communes, mainly communes that are really heavily loaded in coastal regions, have decided to raise slightly the taxe foncière on second homes. That is the only thing that's really changed. It's not as bad as what people would have you believe. It's a very small increase in the taxe foncière. It's by no means doubling them, as some people suggested. And a lot of those taxes were a lot less than the equivalent council tax in the UK anyway to start with. So the incidence really, I can't see an awful lot of change happening.
Excellent. Okay, now thank you very much. And we touched there a little bit on residency. So perhaps Eric, just turning to you in terms of perhaps retirement plans. We had a question here about securing long-term residency, and I'm sure perhaps Fab, you'll have something to say on this as well. But yes, how may retirement plans be affected securing residency and a long-term visa? Is anything likely to change there?
To be honest, I don't think so. That's my first thinking. There is a lot more. I see a lot more British citizens, American citizens, Austrian citizens making plans to move to France and enjoy what they see as, and obviously I agree with them, la belle vie, as we call it. I don't think the political side of it will have any effect in what's going to happen. It is maybe more likely that the elections in the UK or the US are likely to have an effect on those people, those citizens from the US and the UK coming into France in bigger numbers.
Yes, of course. Fab, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, well, we've seen something. I mean, if we're being honest, as part of the visa process post-Brexit, there's one very big agreement that has been negotiated and has been kept for British retirees, which is the S1 program, which is a European program that they've maintained post-Brexit. So basically, that was a massive perk. And well, I don't see them extending this S1 program to the whole public. So unless they do that, it shouldn't have much change in regard to medical insurance, because basically the S1 is a way for you, if you're a British pensioner, to avoid buying medical insurance when you apply for your visa. If anything, we've actually seen in France in January, the French government trying to actually loosen the grip a bit, like, you know, trying, as Trevor mentioned, touch base on this, like they tried to make it a bit easier for second homeowners to buy into France. Unfortunately, it wasn't accepted. So maybe we'll see something like this come again. But this is, at this stage, I would say probably still a bit unlikely, and there are still ways to cop around the issue. So I don't see, I mean, for me, it's mostly positive, I would say, because if nothing changes, actually, it's kind of positive.
Absolutely. No, thank you, everyone. Okay, well, let's turn to you then, Rob. I had a question about expats and tax. What is the most likely tax change expected from the new government for an expat from the UK?
Do you want me to take up the next 50 minutes of this broadcast? And I think that whichever, well, both parties have announced their manifestos, and both are really, the manifestos are saying nothing apart from what they're going to give away. Now, you have to bear in mind that in the UK, which is one of the reasons why we've seen so many Brits move over to France in the last few years, is, you know, the taxes in the UK, the tax take is now as high as at the end of the Second World War. So the taxes in the UK are much, much higher than you find when you arrive in France. And that's sort of much maligned in the UK because they point the fingers across the channel and tell everyone it's a highly taxed jurisdiction. But I've got to say that they need to look to their side, so to speak. But I think that the one thing that will happen for the election is that taxes are not going to go down. You know, the UK tax system is frozen until 2028. Both parties who are likely to win, and actually after last night's debate, I don't think there's any other but one winner, shall we say. with a week to go and 20 points lead in the polls, I think we're looking at Labour taking over after 14 years. And with everything they've promised, which is NHS and everything else, they're going to have to find some money somewhere. And it's not going to come from direct taxation, because direct taxation, as I said a few minutes ago, is at the highest level since the end of the Second World War. So they're going to have to be quite cute about where they generate income from. And taxing things that are not currently taxed, or taxing them higher, is the only way to go. Some of the things that are being muted at the moment by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and other bodies like that they're really quite scary. Things like removing personal allowances for non-UK residents on UK income. Now that's going to massively impact people who've got, let's say, rental properties that they've kept in the UK, and that's how they're generating their income. If you've got a UK government service pension, that's still taxed in the UK. So people are getting hit for the highest taxes they could do on both sides of the channel. So I don't see any reduction in taxes as a result of the election. I see an increase, and it's going to be a little bit more creative as well. So you're going to have to really start to look at where you've got your assets. And I have to say that leaving assets in the UK, if you decide to leave, I think it's going to be even worse than it's been for the last 20 years.
Okay, thank you, Rob. If I'm reading between the lines, it seems you're saying sell up everything you've got in the UK and move over to beautiful France.
Well, we can do that in the next week. That would be beneficial. I'm not sure you'll
I mean, certainly something I've noticed from reading around this, on the tax point. So yes, Labour have said they're not going to raise income tax, VAT or national insurance. So there's only so many levers that they have. And, if they are going to win, as of course the polls are suggesting, with these commitments on tax, it's unlikely, although of course we never know exactly. They're going to be rushing in to make any big changes. But of course, we don't know this for sure. But looking at the pound very quickly, that's actually one of the reasons the pound's up at almost a 2-year high buying euros, some of the best times in 2 years to be buying euros, because actually they think there's not going to be a massive change in the economic policy of the Labour government versus the Conservatives, and that's certainly been quite supportive for sterling. So we'll talk more about that in a moment. But Trevor, let's come back to you. I had a question here, just really going back to basics a little bit. We've got Douglas Glass, looks like he's very new with all of this. What is the main consideration when starting to look to buy in France? It is my first time.
Well, it depends if you're buying a second home or you're looking to move there, really, and what you want from it. If you're looking for capital appreciation or not, or it's lifestyle choice. I mean, the majority of our clients, to be honest, is choosing a lifestyle choice. It's always nice to try and make a bit of capital appreciation if you can. You're probably not going to do that in most rural areas, to be frank. The areas where you'll see that traditionally has been in French cities, although the market peaked about 18 months ago. It's now it's been rectified and it's going through. The problem we have at the moment in coastal areas and cities is that there's this period of sort of, recognizing the fact that there has been a drop in prices as interest rates have risen. So it's probably a very good time to now look at buying in those areas where the price will recover with time. Only it will recover over the next 4 or 5 years if that's an issue. But I would say for the majority of our clients, it's a lifestyle choice, and what they want is space, quiet, and good quality living. They're not really looking to make money on their properties. They've already done that in the past, and they're in a kind of privileged moment of their lives where they can actually choose what they want as a lifestyle choice over an investment choice, and their investments could be probably made better elsewhere. What I will say is that return on investment on rental properties in France is far greater than it is in the UK. There are a lot more tax breaks for people, a lot more deductions acceptable against the rent as a charge, depending on how you set it up. It's not uncommon to find, even now, 6-7% return on investment. I myself have a couple of properties let in the UK, and after tax at the moment as a non-resident, I'm getting hammered. I'm lucky if I see 2%. It's, I think quite rightly, as Rob says, and from a fiscal point of view, I think France is quite advantageous at the moment. and will remain so, you know, depending the outcome of the election here or there. I can't see that changing. Obviously, we were at a peak like the UK was post-COVID, with prices extremely high, with loans available easily at very low interest rates, which drove prices considerably higher than they should have been. There's been a rectification in the market, and I think that has already taken place, and leaving what is an opportunity really to come into the market at a good price, and that will be like that, I think, for the next 2 or 3 years. So it's a really good time going forward over the next. We're not going to see any price increases, I don't think, for at least 2 or 3 years. It's going to remain stable. There's a lack of property coming to market because, unfortunately, a lot of people are sitting on these 1% or less loans. A lot of people borrowed for 20 to 25 years with loans at less than 1%. And of course, nobody's really wanting to get rid of those loans. They want to keep them as long as they can. So the fact that there's a shortage of property still coming to market keeps the prices pretty buoyant. So, you know, I don't think there was a much better time I've seen since the mid-90s to get into the market.
Oh, very good. Thank you. And I'm going to stay with you, Trevor, because there has been another question that's come in. I think it certainly leads into this, and you sort of touched on it ever so slightly, just in terms of areas. You know, obviously in your experience, we've had a question here from Dan Harris. What are the up and coming areas in France that also offer a good investment as well as a good way of life? Any trends you're seeing there in particular areas, Trevor? Sorry, Trevor, I think you're on mute. Apologies.
Yeah, sorry, the big cities were where most of the inflation took place. So cities like Nantes, Rennes, Bordeaux, Lyon, Paris, obviously, were obtained very, very high level of pricing. And demand remained very high as people migrated around. And most of the pool of good jobs were sort of centered around these locations. The provincial towns at that time were very cheap. And then at post-COVID, those prices went up quite a lot. So you were looking at prices, you know, sort of hitting 3,000 or 4,000 euros a square meter. In the major cities, they were hitting 8 to 10, and Paris from sort of, you know, 15 to 20 in some areas. I mean, the minimum price post-COVID was about 8,000 a square meter just for sort of a good location, not top location. And, you know, frankly, the provincial towns at the moment are offering really good value for money because those places have been hit really quite hard by the recession, and there are some proper real bargains. I've seen some recently come up where, you know, and it really is a Franco-French market, so there wasn't a competition for the international buyers in those markets. And of course, the domestic market has been hit worse than the non-resident, you know, traditional holiday home type places that didn't really have that inflation. Now, you could argue that post-recession, these places will see the biggest increase in value. So, you know, I think that's where the clever money would go to, you know, nice provincial town centre, big properties.
Okay, very good. Well, I know they've said in the UK, obviously with COVID, they said everyone moved out of the cities to be in the countryside, you know, sort of globally. And now they're saying certainly in London and perhaps in France as well, you know, people moving back into the cities, and it's freeing up a lot of this beautiful property in the countryside. So that's happening in France as well.
No, not really. I mean, what happened in the countryside was a lot of the villages, some of the much cheaper property that was difficult to get rid of was sort of mopped up post-COVID by people panicking, needing a place in the country and just buying almost anything. And they were mainly French buyers. Unfortunately, they paid top dollar for them and probably paid agency fees and notaries fees on top, and now want their money back, which they're going to find extremely difficult to do, which is going to offer some pretty reasonable opportunities as well for international buyers who will be able to get them at pretty good terms. They're not ready, I don't think, a lot of these guys to let them go for less than they paid for them yet, but they're going to have to.
Interesting. Okay, thank you very much, Trevor. Eric, let's come to you. Just about being fiscally resident over in France. We've got a question here from PJ Wasilik. How is French exit tax calculated if deciding to cease being fiscally resident?
I'm sorry for saying, but I'm not a fiscal specialist, so it is something I will have difficulty to explain. It's more visa coming into France, not exiting France.
My apologies. My apologies. I mean, Fab or Rob, would you have any answers there, say in terms of tax for being fiscally resident? Any changes there we should be aware of?
To you, Rob.
Thank you very much. No, there's no changes. I mean, the exit tax was brought in probably 10 years ago now, and it really is for France to capture capital gains that people have appreciated while they've been French resident. And in a way, it's had a good job of keeping people in France, because I was in Malta recently, and there's a guy there who's actually been a French resident, accumulated value in a business. He's moved out, but he can't realize the gain for 2 years. So he's effectively sitting on it and not able to use it. So it's one of those things where you need to be aware of what exit tax applies to, and because some people will just blindly go into it and then find out that it's landed on their laps. There's a way around it, and if you invest in the right assets, those assets are exempt from exit tax. But the list is a little bit too long this evening, so I'm happy to take anything afterwards.
But the bright news is there is no entry tax, or not as per se, because, for example, we've seen quite a lot of remote workers coming into France thanks to that new post-COVID trend. And although there isn't, maybe Eric can elaborate on that, but there is no remote worker visa, but there are ways to use kind of a retirement visa, non-workers visa to allow people to remote work. The bright news is that it's very easy to get and to secure visa, and therefore it's kind of for free. I mean, the price tag that comes to that is very cheap, so it allows, and the employer doesn't even need to agree. Well, that's a massive perk if the employer is willing to pay French social charges, but it's not a mandatory option for the employer, and therefore the employee could come to France much more easily through that process. So.
Okay, Fab, that's brilliant. Thank you, everyone, for answering that. Right, I'm going to take one on here. It's about how a Labour majority could affect sterling. Will a Labour majority adversely affect the pound against the euro? Well, sort of touched on this already, just in terms of how the Labour Party is perceived. Historically, the Conservatives are always seen as the party of business and, control over the economy, a steady pair of hands. In recent years, that's really changed. Labour are now seen as the fact they're sticking to the spending plans, as we've mentioned. They're not looking to raise any of the key tax levers of national insurance, VAT, national insurance. There's not a huge amount of difference between some of the key features of economic policy for the Conservatives and Labour. And actually, the Conservatives have not done themselves any favours in the UK in some respects. I mean, we had, you may remember the quote by Boris Johnson saying the F word about business. We'd also had the Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng episode where sterling really came under some pressure. I mean, I had lots of calls from clients buying property in France, quite worried about where exchange rates were headed at that time. We lost about 4 or 5% in a matter of days. It did recover, but it's not the kind of thing you want to wake up to. So the Conservatives haven't done themselves too many favours. And as I mentioned, Labour being very far ahead in the polls, the 20-point lead they've had hasn't really changed too much since the election was called. And markets like certainty. So from a sort of currency market perspective, it's not that sterling's going to dramatically rise, although of course it could do, but it's certainly seen that sterling should be reasonably supported by the expected outcome of this election. And that could be better news potentially for euro buyers. Now, there's never any guarantees of what's going to happen. I'm reminded of past events and how the pollsters really got it wrong. Of course, Brexit, the prediction there was a leave vote, was a remain vote, and it ended up leave. Trump, the American election, he wasn't predicted to get in, and of course he did. And actually, if you look at all the recent elections in the UK, the pollsters have always got it wrong. 2017, Theresa May was expected to win. She ended up having a hung parliament, and she had to partner with the DUP, the Democratic Ulster Unity Party in Northern Ireland, to get her government on track. So we never quite know what's around the corner, and it's really important to be aware of this, certainly from the currency perspective. If you're looking at your budget for buying over in France, what we've actually done is looked at some research on where the currency markets typically head around the time of an election. And our research suggests an average movement of 5% in and around the time of an election. So to put that in context, if you're buying a €250,000 property, that 5% could be a difference of £10,000. So that could be quite a nasty shock to have to deal with should you see the rates moving against you. And like I say, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen at this election, but say history does tell us we normally do see a lot of increased volatility around the time of election. So in answer to the question, will a Labour majority adversely affect the pound? At present, it's not looking like it will make a huge negative impact, but we just don't know. And it's really how the market reacts. With the market predicting a very strong Labour majority, if for any reason their majority isn't perhaps quite as high as expected, that would mean that the reality wasn't meeting with the predictions that we've had, and that could in theory see the pound slightly lower. So as we mentioned, pound euro levels not far off a 2-year high, looking to buy over in France. So certainly a good time from that perspective. Right, let's dig into some more questions. Carol Knowles has asked, what extra costs are involved in buying and running a house in France? So I'm sure any of you could answer that question. Trevor, perhaps you're the property expert. I could start with you. What extra costs are involved in buying and running a house in France, please?
Well, as opposed to in England, or just extra costs that may be unforeseen?
Take both.
Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, unforeseen costs. I mean, the biggest one is people falling in love with properties where there's a lot of work to do. I mean, obviously now we have the audit énergétique, which is like a DPE, which is something now that we have to have done, which is obviously a rating from A to G, which means that when borrowing money, which is not easy these days, they will only lend the cost of the work, the house plus the work that it will take to get it to a B or C rating. Now, if the rating is below that, which a lot of the beautiful old farmhouses that people see are, they have single glazing, they have beautiful stone walls that are 50, 60 centimeters thick. They have old stone flag floors or tiled floors with no insulation beneath the floor. But saying that, what they're asking for here is a lot more than what most British homes have. So I think they've gone a bit over the top with it, frankly, in France. I mean, we did have some guidelines that were put in place, if you remember, back in the UK, that was scrapped. And there's European guidelines to get everybody to make their homes more energy conscious and better insulated, to get their domestic bills down, so they're consuming less energy and whatever. There is quite a lot of help for residents in order to put in these days, new windows, put in solar panels, put in this, put in that. But going back, hidden costs are all this costs quite a lot of money. It's quite expensive, and people tend to buy bigger homes in France than they would buy in the UK. Now, the bigger the house, the bigger the bill. Yeah, and that means it's common sense, but people don't think about it. And that means heating bills, because we're in Western Europe and it gets cold in the winter and you're still going to have to heat your home. Some people forget that and get carried away with it's not uncommon for people to buy a 300, 350 square meter. It's 3,000, 3,500 square foot homes, and they're poorly insulated. And they cost an absolute fortune to run. And those costs, people have no idea, and I mean no idea, what it costs to run those homes. It's not uncommon to have 10 to 15,000 euro electricity bills in those big homes. Yeah.
Okay, well, do your research, speak to yourself and the Leggett team, and they'll certainly be able to help you understand all of this in advance.
But that's the biggest thing, I think. But other than that, I mean, the house prices are a lot cheaper. But recurring costs as utilities, etc., it can cramp your lifestyle. So
Absolutely. Great. Anyone else got anything to add there they feel is relevant? Just about any costs to be aware of?
Yes, I'm thinking about additional cost if people don't live there regularly or if they are too old to tackle the task ahead. If you're using your house as a second home, you'll have to think about grass cutting and maybe employing somebody to cut the grass on your behalf, because in some parts of France it rains and there's a lot of sunshine and the grass grows a lot faster. A swimming pool maintenance, it's something, you might have a wonderful swimming pool, but you've got to think about the maintenance, the edge of the pool, what's going to be done, the warranty on the liner, if you have such a just outside cost that you don't really think about or wave off when you are falling in love with a property, which everybody does, but it's something you have to factor in.
And let's not forget the sexier topic again, insurance. I mean, well, not that insurance. I mean, you have to buy insurance in the UK as well, but in France, every living thing, I would say, needs to be insured at least for public liability. So that means humans, obviously, but animals as well. Like if you have dogs, well, dogs, cats, obviously, but horses as well, you need to be covered at least for public liability, just in case they cause some damage or break things off. So that doesn't cost an arm, but maybe a bit of a leg.
John, can I try and put a positive spin on this? With
Of
all
course.
these, because Trevor talked about it before, lots of people move to France and they move there because they fall in love. And actually that's part of the problem. They fall in love and then they repent at their leisure when they actually start getting the bills through. Because when you're buying, you don't think about those things. You're intoxicated by the property and the place and everything else about France. But from a positive point of view, I think it's not an extra cost, it's the tax saving. You know, lots of people we deal with, they're coming out of the UK where there's personal allowances for each person. But a lot of the people we're dealing with, especially retired expatriates, maybe one of them hasn't got as big an income as the other, so they're not using the personal allowance. And maybe the other one has got a high income. And they're used to paying higher income tax rates. Well, the French income tax system is really, really beneficial to a family or a couple because the income is spread across the whole household. So if you look at it, I would say in 8 out of 10 cases, when you're comparing the income tax bill in the UK to the income tax bill in France, it's less in France. Yeah. Now that's not an extra cost. That's actually able to pay for the gardener that Eric was talking about and the pool maintenance and all these other things. So I think the yin and yang here is that you might have other costs, but actually from a tax point of view, you can make tax in France really a lot better than you can in the UK. There's much more flexibility with it.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. And I'd certainly put a more positive spin on in terms of the currency side of things, you know, getting a saving on your exchange rate, you know, that can amount to thousands. And of course, that can help to cover any natural costs you're going to have. Yes, running the swimming pool, brilliant, worth every penny on a hot day over in France. So let's look at some of the questions we've had submitted live. Lots of people posing those questions. Please do keep them coming in. Eric, we'll come back to you on visas, and Fab, perhaps you can help here as well. How easy is it to move to France on a retirement visa and then change to a working visa? Is that possible?
The short answer is yes, it is possible. The retirement visa obviously is to be applied in the country of residence. Our audience tonight being mostly UK based, so it's all going to the French consulate in London. Once you have your stick and your passport, you move to France and you start, for most people, either repairing their properties, doing a bit of heavy maintenance, doing the gardens. A lot of them starting gîte business, but they are preparing the gîte for year 2, where the change of status can be done. So, about 50% of my British clients do come here on a retiree visa, and then we arrange for a change of status before the end of the first year, and that is working relatively well.
And just a side note, like on the technical side, but technically speaking. It's all a visitor visa, retirement visa, remote worker visa, non-working visas. All of those, they don't exist as per se. It's all called the visitor visa. And I know the word sounds confusing in English. It's a long-term visa. It's not a temporary visa. They all fall under the umbrella of the visitor visa. I'm saying this because it used to be a retirement visa. It's like 2020, 2021. It's been dropped off. So they're not all visitor visas. So just in case you're looking and people say, well, I didn't see it or whatever. So it's just for that it's easier to understand that we call it a retirement visa.
Perfect. Okay, thank you, Fab. Thank you both for your answers there. Right, a question we keep getting, and you know, we've sort of touched on it ever so slightly earlier, but it's about the 90, 180-day rule. And I'd just really like to get a bit of a snapshot, perhaps from each of you, just about that, and you know, any possible changes. Certainly, something we'd talked about off air before we came live is that actually Labour government perhaps looking to have warmer relations with the EU. Whether we're going to see any changes to the 90, 180-day rule or not, but just how, you know, clients are managing to deal with that and any particular sort of future direction there.
Well, you know, we follow quite closely the campaign to push it to 180 days, and I must admit, I was kind of like thinking, well, I don't know how they're going to do this without making it sort of universal for all non-residents, because you can't really favour one country over another outside the EU. So I was sort of curious to think, well, and a lot of people said, well, yeah, we do that for the French, but then we're not in the EU, so we don't have to make a decision. Obviously, one of the advantages, I guess, one of the only ones I can think of being outside the EU is you don't have to get, you know, 27 other countries to agree. So I'm not sure if it's going to happen. I think, you know, really legislatively, I think it became a problem. There were things about it meant changing a lot more than just a rule for the Brits, and I think they want to do it. I don't think there's any question of that. I think the government would love to do it. It's that, how do you say yes to a Brit and no to an American? How do you say yes to a Brit and no? So unless we get a deal, something along the lines of Switzerland, we're not really going to become members of Schengen tomorrow, are we? Let's be honest. I highly doubt that, but who knows? I really hope personally that, you know, Keir Starmer, if he does become Prime Minister, has much better relationship with the EU, and that there is possibly a trade deal in view in some form or another that comes with a compromise on movement in some form or another. How that will look or feel, we've no idea. I hope they don't have a referendum on it next time. But we'll have to wait and see. So, you know, I'm hopeful they will come to some sort of agreement. I think that a Labour government has much more chance of achieving it than the one that took us out of Europe, and that the Europeans are going to be far more willing to negotiate with them than they are with the Conservatives. So there you go. That's kind of logical.
Negotiations, if I may add, yeah, negotiations could take place and might already have started, but it will take a long time anyway for them to mature and be put in place. And Trevor hit the nail on the head here by saying the law that was going to be voted accepting British citizens who have a second home in France to be here for 6 months didn't take care of any other citizenship. So, and that is what was deemed to be unconstitutional by the French highest, you know, thinkers, and that was the reason for that law to be squashed and killed in the egg. If we do that, we'll have to think about the South African, for example. South African citizen can only, you know, even if he wants to spend 1 day in France, has to get a visa. Canadian, USA, British can come here for 90 days. The famous 90 out of 180. So there'll be a lot of, I think, more important, and I'm sorry for saying important, matters politically and between the various countries to be agreed before, you know, the 90 days are likely to be increased.
But it's important to also bear in mind that France also is after the money of, I mean, they want people to invest into France. So basically that was the goal of that law, to have more Brits buy French properties at the end of the day. That was basically what was driving them. And I think France hasn't given up on this idea. And as Trevor was saying, I think it could actually be extended. It's just, I think it's difficult for them to extend it to a certain degree, because obviously they probably don't want to extend the offer to any countries, and that's where they hit a roadblock. But I think it's important to bear in mind that they probably still want to make it easier for expats or wannabe expats or just second-home owners to be able to purchase a property in France. That I've seen that they have this.
Of course they do. I mean, in rural areas, Fab, I mean, people, look, I'm there for 6 months, are going to spend more money. Of course, the French would love to do it if they could.
Yeah, but they'll be hiring builders and stuff. I mean, you know, we all know. I mean, that's why very often the Brits are more than welcome to France. I mean, people love the Brits because they would buy these massive places that the French would usually not buy because they're too big for them, like mills or small castles, or, you know, not everyone can buy that, but and very often they do something with the place, and the French would love it. So the more we can get it done, the more they'll try to do it.
I'm always struck by the airports when I've flown into France. You know, certainly some of the more local areas. You know, Dinan, up in the sort of Brittany area, and you know, down in the Dordogne and Limoges. You know, sometimes there's only one flight a day to Paris, but you've got about 5 or 6 flights to the UK. You know, some of these airports, it's just they're almost purely for Brits in many respects. And yes, just again on the impact on the economy there. So yes, a very shrewd government that can make things a bit easier for people to come over there. And like I say, everyone's very welcoming, and yeah, hopefully this Labour government.
Is that we've had a lot more people move as a result of this. So the 90 days has meant that more people have taken up residency. So we are seeing more people actually buying full-time, moving to France full-time as a result.
I feel also very sorry for people who have owned a house in France for the past 20 years and say, I can't go to my home for more than three months. And I feel very, very sorry for them. And for those listeners who are in that situation, you've got to understand that you can apply for a 6-month visa. And that gives you a little bit more time if you choose your time right, which you could also combine in most circumstances with your 90 days, which gives you a full 9 months in France every year.
Can I just add one thing at that point? If you spend 9 months in France, you become a tax resident. Yeah, people seem to forget that, and there are an awful lot of people who are now, excuse the expression, chickens coming home to roost, who applied for a titre de séjour, but one of the requirements is to become a French tax resident. So there are a number of letters going out at the moment from the FISC asking people why they've not made a tax return. So, you know, we're starting to come across more and more who've applied, and they're just using it as a means to spend more time in France, but sooner or later the taxman is going to knock on the door, and I think people need to be really aware of that.
Okay, thank you, Rob, and thank you everyone for your answers there. So we're getting a lot of questions on that, and it's going to continue, I'm sure, to be an important point of debate as the years go on. So worth being in touch with experts to get the latest news. Rob, we're actually going to stay with you. I've got another tax question coming in, and it's not too disconnected to the last points you were making. I mean, if one does become French tax resident, is there any need to physically move assets from the UK to France?
No, there's no requirement. You can leave all your assets in the UK, but it always seems rather strange to me that you've decided to leave, but you leave your most important assets behind. You know, people who leave the UK and leave their, let's say, their pensions behind, they're just leaving them wide open to changing legislation and increases in taxes. We have a window of opportunity at the moment where the Conservative government got rid of the lifetime allowance. So actually, what the lifetime allowance was the amount you can have in private pensions, which was exempt from an additional tax. Now that has been gathering up for the last few years, since about 2006, more and more revenue for the UK government. Now, in an attempt to pacify everyone and probably an attempt to keep them in government, they got rid of it. Straight away, the Labour Party jumped up and screamed and said that they were going to they were actually going to reinstate it the day after they were elected into power. Now, they've slightly changed their voice at the moment, because I think they've realised that isn't going to garner them any more votes, but it's still a hot potato. And we have to remember that, you know, there's very little they're going to be able to do from a fiscal point of view, because they've already announced that the first budget is not going to be until September. So for anyone who's moving or who still has assets in the UK that may be adversely affected by a change of government, they've still got time to do something about it. And probably the biggest thing on the horizon from a leaving assets in the UK, if you move to France perspective, is probably capital gains tax, because it's the one area where the Labour Party have kept very quiet. They've said they won't impose capital gains tax on main residences, but they haven't gone any further than that. And Keir Starmer, in numerous debates that he's had on TV in the UK, has absolutely run away from answering any of those questions. But, you know, in France, Macron got rid of capital gains tax being taxed at income tax rates and brought it down to the fixed rate system. The UK and the Labour Party, there's lots of rumours that they'll go to that system. So if you're going to realise a UK capital gain, it could be taxed not at the current rates at 20% or 24%, but it could be taxed at your marginal income tax rate, and that could be up to 45%. Now, that'll generate quite a lot of revenue for the UK. So if you're in the process of doing that, I know it's difficult to sell properties quickly, but I think capital gains is one of the things where Labour will sneak up from behind, because they'll claim it's only a tax that the really rich are going to pay. And most working men in the street and working ladies in the street, there's been this comment about working people don't have any savings. So if you've got any savings, you're obviously not a working class person, so you're liable to all the taxes that Labour's going to bring in. So I think that, in answer to the question, John, you can leave assets in the UK, but if you've chosen to leave, why are you leaving your assets there? And if you leave your assets there, don't be surprised if an incoming government, whether it's blue or red, because, you know, if the Tories are going to get rid of, you know, they're going to get rid of national insurance as we know it now, the sort of the expectation is they've got to generate another 45 billion to cover that offset. So that's going to take an awful lot of gathering.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. Trevor, going to come to you. We've had a question here. It's like a couple looking to buy a gîte business over in France. Any extra implications that they should be aware of? Of course, a gîte business is like a B&B. Anything extra to consider? Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's more the vendors have more to consider when they're selling a gîte complex, because obviously, even though the part of the home that they live in is not subject to capital gains tax, obviously the gîte being a business is. And it's obviously something that now the tax regulations on furnished lettings are changing. The regulations on the DPE regarding furnished lettings, you know, seasonal lettings, is also changing. There's a lot of things happening. In the old days, what used to happen was somebody would buy a business with a gîte. Quite often they'd just pop it on Airbnb, take the rent in the UK and not declare it in France, but those days are over. Those days are well and truly over, because once the French taxman gets a whiff of somebody renting out, they go onto Airbnb. They can look at the booking calendar, they can see the availability, they can work out exactly what they've done. And if it's not declared as a business, then you know, they haven't really got a business. So what's happening with a lot of gîte businesses are people wrap up the business a year before they want to sell it. Now, that means you haven't got any books. So if you're buying a gîte business, you'll buy it without any books. And a lot of our clients are saying, right, I'm going to sell my home as a home, because I don't want to pay any capital gains tax on the gîte part of the business, so it's all one house. So they wrap the business up, close it down before they sell the property in order to avoid the capital gains tax. Okay, that's fine, but there's no books. So it's guesswork what they've got, and you're buying it out. So a lot of the time you're going to be buying a house with a cottage next door or two cottages next door. Unless you've got a bigger gîte complex which is set up as companies, and that's when you've got 4, 5, 6, 7 gîtes, and that's a proper business. And quite often set up as a sort of limited company structure, an STI on IS, and all sorts of other structures. There's many ways to do it, either on personal income. You know, the property we bought as a Société Civile Immobilier can either be on IR and Consul revenue, which is personally taxed, or IS, which is like, you know, corporation tax. There's advantages to one and the other, depending on if you want to claim back VAT on works, or if you want to be able to, you know, put all of the investment you put in and claim it back. And I mean, this is an accountant's job. Obviously, we work with accountants to do it, so I'm not going to go into it in too much depth. But we work with partners ourselves who will give the buyers advice on how to set it up, how the one they're buying has been set up, what the liabilities are. You know, you don't just go rushing into it. It is far more complex than it used to be. It's nothing to be scared of in any way. But like everything these days, it has to be done properly. The old days of how exciting it used to happen are over, I'm afraid. You know, the booking platforms are very transparent. Everybody needs the booking platforms. And if you're on a booking platform, the tax man will obviously imagine that you're busy, not that you're not. So, you know, my advice is get some advice before you buy it. Take a good look at it. And it's very important how you purchase the property in the first place. And that's something obviously Rob's team can advise you on as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Anyone got anything else to add? You know, considering a gîte purchase, any extra implications? I certainly know from my point of view, it seems quite popular. It's the dream, isn't it? Get a little business over there, you're getting the income. It sounds great, and of course, it can be very good. But yeah, it's just helpful to get a bit more information.
If they run a gîte business, I would say that's a small one. Basically, the LMNP kind of threshold, like 23,000 each. That might be seen as a non-professional activity, and therefore would remain also compatible with the visitor visa, retiree visa, non-working visa, which is a massive perk as well, because they don't have to set up a business, they don't have to find a business plan. This is an option that's always on the table, but basically that's also one of the reasons that these gîtes are popular, because it's also a gateway to France without having to go through some of the complexities of, well, creating a proper structured business. Again, most of the time it depends, but if it's a small gîte, they probably, like Trevor was saying, they probably will be doing that under the national taxes, and they won't have to incorporate a business and stuff. Maybe they will, but most of the time they won't. And it remains compatible with the easy visa to get. Like, I mean, don't you agree, Eric?
Yes, I do. Yes, and a big reminder to everyone thinking or already in a gîte situation or anything similar is to make sure that they do their French tax return on time, around the April time, just, you know, preparing. It will also be the only positive way they'll have to show that they have spent a full year in France.
Brilliant. Okay, everyone, some really good answer there. Thank you very much. Got a question on visas again, and well, certainly to do with the carte vitale, and just asking how that could affect, as a just retired French business owner, fiscally resident in France and in possession of a carte vitale, will I keep this healthcare, or do I now need to go down the S1 route?
Well, Eric,
sorry, Fabien.
I'm sorry. Well, Eric can elaborate on this as well. Basically, for the S1, this is a very simple eligibility test. Do you have UK state pension or not? So you might be an early retiree or drawing down from a private pension, but if you don't have national, so it depends if you've been working in the force, or, you know, well, if you have state pension, then you're eligible to the S1. If you don't, then you're not eligible. So actually, it's not you who decide if you have the option or not. It depends on your situation. And there's also, I mean, Rob probably can elaborate on this, because the S1 also have some tax implications, like then you don't have to pay for French national health care. I mean, did I get that right, Rob?
Yeah, the S1 is, if you are able to get hold of an S1, it's possibly the most important document somebody who's retiring to France could obtain, because it not only gets you into the French healthcare system, which we all see the stories about the NHS in the UK, but the really important bit for me is it exempts you from a load of the French social charges, and that's really the crippler between the UK and France. When people say that France is an expensive country, it isn't about the tax. The tax is less. It's all about the social charges, and that S1 exempts you from so many and reduces others. It's just such a valuable piece of kit. And we come across so many people who don't know about it. And they say, oh, well, I've not paid into the UK system for very long. You don't need to pay into it for the full term. If you've just paid in for a few years and your state pension only buys you your morning coffee in France, it gets you in the healthcare system and it avoids a lot of French social charges. It is so valuable.
And they can always trigger the DS1 process. They can always trigger the process even if they've moved 10 years ago. Something also most are not aware of.
In fact, I had a problem with my father. My father moved to France at the age of 88, and he was going to a retirement home in the UK or come and live with us in France. So we didn't know about the S1 form. I've lived in France for 35 years. Of course, I didn't know anything about it. So we took out private healthcare for him for the period that he needed to get his card. It cost us $8 grand for the private healthcare because we didn't have the S1. And then we made a claim on it, and of course, it was impossible to claim anything on it. It was the most worthless piece of insurance I've ever seen in my life. You know, we wasted probably a lot of time, effort, and money by not having the S1.
And Eric, maybe you can, because actually applying into the French system, like CPAM usually, like the equivalent of the NHS, it's something that pretty much the whole can do within the first year of the relocation, can they?
Yeah, that is correct. Yes, between month 3, month 4 of arriving in France under the cover of a long stay visa, we do the documentations for all our clients to join the French health system. Just some forms again to complete. Going back on the S1, anybody in doubt, any UK citizen or anybody coming from the UK or UK based originally thinking about S1, could give the people in Newcastle a very phone call. They're very friendly. It's a 0191 number. You find it by Googling or use search engine S1 NHS, and you'll get a phone number. You call them, they'll be very happy to talk to you.
And I also just ask, if you're living in France, but you still have UK earnings and you're paying UK national insurance, you can also apply for an S1. It's not just retired people. So in the right circumstances, even somebody who's paying UK national insurance is entitled to an S1. And Trevor obviously didn't know about it because he's not old enough.
Well, there you go. Very informative. Thank you, everyone. And this just shows how important it is to be in touch with experts when you're considering your international plans. And say everyone on our panel, real experts in their fields. I think to summarize, you know, we're talking about how the election would impact your French plans. And actually, with no major changes expected, it seems there's certainly some positives potentially we can take. A stronger pound, possibly, not guaranteed, of course. Perhaps some closer ties with the EU that could lead to more positivity there. So certainly no major changes expected, although of course we never know. But before we sign off, I'm just going to pass back to each of our panelists. Thank you all so much for tonight. It's been really good. We haven't got through all the questions. We will be distributing the video of this recording, and all of our audience will get a chance to engage further with the panelists. But yes, if I could just hand back to each one of you just for an outro and just a quick summary of your thoughts on the situation. But yes, Trevor, if I can start with you. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite hopeful. I think from a UK perspective, I think they're going to be in a good place. I think that you're going to get a clear majority, which means that the government can govern. That's more than what I can say for us. I think, you know, really and truly, I've often seen this over the years where the UK sort of gone down slightly quicker than the others. And I think Brexit brought down the UK quicker than the rest of the EU. I do think the UK will recover probably a little bit quicker, you know, frankly, and I think that the pound is going to be strong, and I think we're going to see a lot of interest from UK buyers in the next few years. I think it's going to be very strong. You know, I think that, you know, the rest of the EU will recover eventually, but it always takes a bit longer. It always does, and I think Brexit provoked an early fall for the Brits, and I think now's the time for the Labour government to repair some of the broken, some of the damage. And I'm quite hopeful that it will be a good period. So,
fantastic. Thank you, Trevor. And Fab, over to you, please.
Well, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I really think like I'm seeing a lot of good development. Actually, whatever happened, even in regard to the French elections, I don't see anything changing on the immigration side because let's be honest, from a French perspective, like the Brits, Americans, Canadians, you all look exotic to me. So and the French love exotics, so everything should remain and stay very positive. And from financial aspect, we've seen this development earlier in the well this year, where they're trying that they show that they're trying to make things more flexible and more easy, and with the right speakers in front of France and the EU, they may actually succeed to ease things out. So yeah, I remain very cautiously optimistic.
Excellent. And Eric, please. Thank you, Fab.
Well, along with the colleagues here, I think the future is very positive. Trevor mentioned the price of property that was still very affordable. Any foreign citizens, so third country, American, Canadian, or UK citizens can absolutely come to France. Don't be frightened about it all. My oldest client is 83-year-old and she's moving to France on her own. So that can be just a show of strength to anybody thinking, oh, will it be for us? Will absolutely, yes, it is for us. With the right documents, with the right visa, you can change life and enjoy, a new life in France.
Beautiful. I'm keen. It's good to know I've got some hope and I can still get over there. I dream of buying probably in the Alps one day or somewhere on the Riviera. All sounds good to me. Rob, over to you. Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
I think in summary, with the way the polls are at the moment, there's only going to be one winner next week. And I think that the Labour have got a fair win behind them as well, because, inflation went down to 2% last week. In due course, through the rest of the year, interest rates are going to come down. That's probably going to energise the UK market. There's then going to be lots more capital gains for them to take a little bit more tax, but actually they can bask in the glory of earning people more money, because tax is only a percentage of your gain. So I think that on the back of that, they can generate a lot more revenue on the back of the economic situation. So I think I agree with everyone else on the panel. I think it's going to be a positive time for the UK, but I think that the hope of tax cuts is a forlorn hope. But I still think that the benefits of the tax system in France, if you plan your affairs correctly, are far better than the UK.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
thank you.
I think the flat tax worth mentioning is that people that live here, a lot of people taking dividends from the UK, are taxed a lot less in France. I don't think people realise that. And before that could disappear, but it's still around for the moment. And what in France tends to happen, even if you get a change of government, they tend to honour what the last government did. They don't go turning it all upside down. They'll bring in their own legislation, but they won't rip out everything that the predecessor did. So that, I think, will remain.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you so much, everyone. Really good to hear all of those positive stories there. And of course, a week to go for the UK election. We'll certainly be running more of these webinars in the future. So you will get a chance to contact all of our panelists more directly for further conversations. But yes, thank you very much to our audience for joining us and submitting your questions. And thank you very much for our panelists for a wonderful evening. That's all from us. Have a lovely evening. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.